So there you go. Hopefully you've got a message saying it's recording, which is great. So that's great. So we're proud to be hosting this webinar, and it's also kind of happening at the same time we're launching some new resources. So we're launching a new free school meals guide, a new flowchart, and 4 new template letters that were written by some lovely lawyers who are joining us today, which is great. So we have solicitor Alex Rook and barrister Steve Broach, which is very exciting. And these lawyers were instructed by Natalie, the campaign founder, who independently raised the funds to kind of produce these materials for you. So we're really hoping that all of these resources will end up in more disabled children accessing free school meals. So that would be great. And a little bit of the schedule for the session is just Natalie's going to introduce herself, and then Alex will talk through the new resources, and Steve will answer some questions around the law. So over to you, Natalie.
Thank you, Imogen. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for attending. I am very proud to be the founder of this disability inclusion campaign and to have helped lead and steer it for the past 2 years. This isn't about free school meals. This is about children with disabilities being left out. This is about children with disabilities not getting the same support and privileges that their non-disabled peers get. This is about the cost of disability. Forget the cost of living crisis. The cost of disability is huge because our social services are broken. They're undermanaged and underfunded. I'm no longer pursuing free school meals for my own child. However, I was once a parent carer suffering this indirect discrimination as my child was ignored and wasn't able to get the help that he needed. I began this campaign a few years ago because in the pandemic lockdowns, I saw that reasonable adjustments could be made. Yes, there are food banks and food boxes presented, but they're often dried food. It's not nutritious, it's not healthy, it's not fresh. For the non-disabled children, they got the free school meal vouchers, and why this wasn't carried on as a reasonable adjustment past the pandemic for children with disabilities not able to eat at the school canteen because of medical and sensory needs or not able to learn from school is not clear. I'm very grateful to Contact Charity for taking this campaign under their wing. We have not got this far without their amazing support over the last year. I'm grateful to all the members of the public who have contributed to the crowdfund, and that has enabled me to cover the legal fees for this campaign. We're very lucky that we have 2 prominent human rights lawyers with us today, barristers Steve Broach and solicitor Alex Rook, and they're giving up their time for free today, so we are very grateful. Finally, last but not least, my 2 admin, Jane Waters and Jane Davis, are carers themselves. They're here today, and without their support, the Facebook group wouldn't have flourished and grown. They've been there for nearly 2 years now, and it was 100 people. It's now 2,000. This has enabled us to network across the country and share who we've met and who on the stories and inspiration with Contact Charity, and Imogen and Una have done so much to try and bring the whole campaign forward. So I'll hand over to Jane Davis now. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm an admin on this campaign. Exactly, I feel the same way as Natalie, and was empowered by how she wanted to campaign for free school meals and justice for children and young people entitled to free school meals. A couple of years ago, my own granddaughter with SEND, who lived with me, is post 16, has been on EOTAS for 2.5 years, and yet there's no provision locally that can meet her needs. As such, the local authority, surprise, surprise, has refused to provide her with the equivalent of free school meals. And yet, if she was able to attend a college or FE setting, she would get those. Now, I know there's a number of you out there in very similar situations, and that's why I'm here. This is the grey area, though. And yet, but I believe Contact and the solicitors have got some information around an avenue that you could take with regard to requesting free school meals from your local authority via social care. But I'll hand over to Jane Waters now and look forward to all of your questions. And if we don't get to answer all of them, I'm sure Contact will make some adjustments there.
Thank you, Jane.
Hello, I'm Jane Waters. I have a son with complex needs. He's 26 now. When he was at school, I've been around the block many, many times, like every single parent carer on this site. And that's how I learned my skills, my advocacy skills, the hard way, doing it myself. And I'm now in the privileged position of being able to support other people who are currently going through the hell I went through as a parent carer. Very, very proud of you, Natalie, to have achieved this. Thank you, Contact and Imogen, and very, very delighted to meet Steve and Alex. Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us.
Great. Thanks. So if I can just hand over to Alex, and do you want me to share the screen?
2 minutes, and then I'll
Perfect. Just let me know.
Great, thank you. Hello, everybody. Good morning. I'm Alex Rook. I'm a solicitor specialising in human rights and public law. Most, but not all, the work we do is on behalf of disabled children or disabled adults. Natalie first got in touch with us about getting free school meals for children educated otherwise than at school, EOTAS. And I'll come to where we are with that issue shortly. But as part of that, it then kind of came to this wider conversation where Natalie, well, actually, what about this person, what about that person? And quite a lot of those, we felt there was already much greater clarity than there is in relation to the EOTAS group. But actually, just parents are really struggling to get the support that they're entitled to. Producing template letters is a fairly well-worn path of ours as a way to try and get family support without having to go to a lawyer and, you know, if that's pay, find somebody, legal aid, etc. And the hope is certainly that these template letters will empower you all to be able to make the arguments that need to be made so that you can get the free school meals that you're entitled to and the reasonable adjustments that you're entitled to. It's worth recognising at the outset, it's not an absolute, because of course what happens if you send the letter and don't get the answer that you want, and we'll no doubt come to that in due course. But the hope is that, and our experience is that, more often than not, if a school or local authority or whoever, you know, the particular letter is going to, and like I said, we do this in relation to social care or in other areas as well, if it comes from you, but it's made clear this is written by lawyers and this is what the law says, now do it, certainly that gives you a much better chance, I think, of getting at the outcome that you want. If we could then, Imogen, just put up the flow chart, if that's okay. This is our attempt to try and gather the various different scenarios that arise and kind of how we then which template letter applies in which scenario you're in. Is that coming? There we go. Marvelous stuff. Thank you. Could you bring me on to the actual, not your handy questions one? Yeah, that one, exactly. Yeah. So this is the document that's going to be seen. And then if you could just scroll down for me, Imogen, to the actual kind of the blocks bit, that would be great. It's there. I think it's one page lower than that. There you go, that bit. Thank you very much. So everyone can see that, I hope. Can you? I don't think you can't see my mouse moving. Can you see that, Steve? Can you see me move my mouse? No, no. So okay. So as you can see, the structure of this is to be that you kind of look at where is your child, and you'll see it's also what age is your child, and then as you go through, can you be supported? What letter do you need to send? So if I start at the far left, so your child is registered at a state-maintained school, is the first category, and then sorry, if you just leave it at the top, that's absolutely fine. Yeah, that would be perfect. And then you'll see that it scrolls down to the next category under that is the child in reception year 1 or year 2. This is the only bit where age is relevant. And you can see that it then says, so if the answer to that question is yes, so your child is at a state-maintained school and they're in reception year 1 or 2, then they are eligible for a free school meal. And it says that if it's not been provided, then you're going to have to go to template letter C. And on the contact website, that will then have a click through. So you'll then go through to the template letter. Imogen, I'm not asking you to do that, just to be clear. But what I'm going to do is just go through the first of these letters so you can kind of see the structure of it. And then the rest of them, you can just do that. The families can do that as it applies to your child. So if you were then to click through to template letter C, what that letter does is, first of all, it's addressed to the chair of governors, and it suggests that you copy that letter to the head teacher, I think. It also, you'll see it says at the bottom, template letter written by Rucco and Sweeney LLP. The reason for that is not for our branding, but to give that message to the School of Governors that, you know, please take this seriously. These people know what they're talking about. And then in the letter has various bits of kind of insert here. So the letter says, I am, and then for you to insert parent of, child, what age, etc., etc. It then sets out the law in relation to this category. And so it starts off with the eligibility to free school meals, sets out the law under the Education Act. Importantly, because one of the issues that certainly Natalie was bringing to us that she was hearing regularly from other families, that the law is clear that free school lunches should be made available either on the school premises or any other place where education is being provided. And that schools have a duty to make reasonable adjustments to avoid disabled pupils being placed at a significant disadvantage. The next paragraph is then for you to insert the details of your particular circumstance, so your child's name, the school they're at, where they're being educated. So if they're not currently attending school, explain why. If they are attending school but they're not able to eat meals, for example, due to sensory needs or dietary needs, explain why. And therefore they're not receiving this free school meals which they are entitled to. And then under a heading which says steps the governing body is requested to take, we then say what we are asking the governing body to do. And in the letter it talks about a weekly supermarket voucher, so that your child is therefore able to access free school meals in an alternative way. And it asks for a response within a certain period of time. And the hope is that sending that letter will then mean that as I go back to the flowchart, your child is in a state-maintained school, they're in years 1 to reception 1 or 2, they're eligible. If they're not getting it, reasonable adjustments are made, they therefore will be getting it. That's kind of how that process works. If there are questions arising, I should say, please do put them through the chat and we'll deal with them all at the end. That structure works better online than me trying to pick up questions now. So if I then move across to the top, you'll see the second heading is that they attend an independent or non-maintained school. And it says there that the local authority has a duty to provide free school meals, but not a power. Sorry, they have no duty to provide, but they do have a power to do so. Now that's a legal distinction, and I'm going to pass that over to Steve in due course, who's going to explain the difference there between a duty and a power. But you'll see in any event there is a letter, a template letter, which you'll then click on, which is you exercise, asking the school to exercise that power even there where there isn't a legal duty. The category where there is currently no duty for a free school meal is if a child is elected to be home educated, and I distinguish that between a child who is educated other than at school, and so there is no duty there for the school to provide a free school meal. Steve, I'm thinking as I go through this, there may actually still be a social care duty in that category as well. And again, that's a category Steve's going to come to it in due course. The one area we haven't yet got to is post-16 provision, because it comes under a different bits of legislation, etc. It's a less common question that we've been asked about for free school meals for post-16, but that's the one bit that's kind of still needs to be done. And then finally, where we were kind of originally approached, is children who are educated other than at school. The reason why Natalie first approached in that area is because this is a kind of a gap in the law, if you like, and actually the bits that Natalie so successfully crowdfunded for was for us to try and get the law changed here. So it's not a case of just writing somebody, please can we have this, because actually there is currently, subject to one caveat I'll come to, no actual entitlement, no power or duty. And so what we have done is written a letter before a claim to the Secretary of State for Education saying that this is unlawful, and inviting the government to change the law so that children who are being educated at school can access free school meals. Now, this seminar is not really the place to kind of go into all of the legal arguments, etc. But for the nub of it is that we say it's a breach of European Convention on Human Rights. We sent our letter in June. The government, in fairness, a couple of times come back and said, this is all quite complicated and it's not easy for us to deal with. We're thinking about it. As a lawyer in this area, and Steve and I are working on the case and work on many cases together, it's pretty clear to me they are taking it seriously. They certainly, the reasons why they say this is complicated are all relatively cogent. Their latest response is on the 25th of August, and they say that they will provide a final reply by the end of October. And that includes the fact that they're looking at a number of complexities for them about changing the scheme, whether this requires primary legislation, how would it actually be administered. They raised the problem about whether they have enough data about children who are educated other than at school, etc. But we hope that the outcome will be that the law will be changed, and that really would be the gold star for Natalie, change the law for all children who are educated other than at school, so that they are entitled in the same way that I started in relation to children at state-maintained schools in reception year 1 and 2, etc. At the moment, there is still, as Jane said, even if your child is educated, is EOTAS, or indeed are homeschooled, there is still the ability to ask the local authority to provide free school meals under social care duties. And you'll see that is that bottom tab on the bottom right, see template letter B. And so this is a letter to ask the local authority to provide support under social care duties rather than under education duties. We are relatively pessimistic about the options of local authorities actually providing that, I think it's fair to say, although nevertheless I know Natalie has provided examples to me of some authorities that have agreed to do that, and some circumstances where families have had to do that. And again, hopefully the template letter B can help in that scenario. I'm sorry to jump around, but I realise as I've done this that I missed out one big group, didn't I? So if I go right over to the left again, where it's registered as state maintained schools, I said if your child is in reception year 1 and year 2, they're eligible for letter C. I'm afraid I forgot to do the if they're older than that. And Imogen, you will have to scroll down for me a little bit, please. So if they're in years 3 or above, up to 16, there's then a financial eligibility question, and this is for all children. Are they financially eligible for free school meals? If the answer to that is yes, they are financially eligible, then the same applies. They should then be eligible for free school meals, and if it's not been provided, there's template letter D. Template letter D is very similar to template letter C. It's effectively that same point that I've just taken you through already. Here's the law, reasonable adjustments, here's our circumstances. Why is your child not getting free school meals? Either because they're not attending school or there's other reasons. And our solution is supermarket vouchers. So really the difference in template letter D and template letter C is just making that point about financial eligibility. I hope that all makes sense. The points then that I said I was going to hand, sorry Imogen, if you could just scroll back up again for me. The points that I said I was going to hand over to Steve about then is the legal point about where authority has no duty, but they have a power. I think Steve's going to go into that a little bit, and then just go into a little bit more about that box at the bottom, which is the point Jane made about whether you can ask for support under social care rather than education. I hope, Steve, I haven't missed anything out. I'm going to then hand over to you.
Thanks very much, Alex. I don't think you have. That was very comprehensive. I've just been going through the Q&A, and happily, I've been able to answer a lot of the questions by reference to the template letters. So we seem to have done a pretty good job in terms of covering the scenarios that people are actually coming up against as well. One of the questions was, where are the template letters? My understanding is they are already on the contact website, and the link is going to be sent around. Imogen's nodding. So don't worry about not having the resources at the moment, guys. They're all coming. So please listen to what we've got to say today, and then everything that we're talking about will be made available very shortly after the webinar, as I understand it, including, I believe, the recording as well. So as Alex said, I'm going to pick up 2 of the slightly trickier legal points that come through from our work on this very important issue. Just to introduce myself more fully, I'm a barrister in practice at 39 Essex Chambers. So I'm instructed by a range of different individuals and organisations on lots of different areas around public law, but I've got a particular background and interest in the law in relation to disabled children. I'm one of the co-authors of Disabled Children, a Legal Handbook, which is published by Legal Action Group and is the main practitioner text in this area. And as Alex mentioned, I've been instructed by Alex and his colleagues at Rook and Sweeney on lots and lots of cases over the years involving education, social care and health disputes around disabled children and young people. So this is our bread and butter work, to use an appropriate analogy in the context of free school meals. And what we're really looking at here, I think, as Natalie brilliantly put it, is not so much about the specific entitlement to a meal on a Wednesday. It's about disabled children and young people missing out in a way that is unfair and very often unlawful. Because for a large group, and that's the group that runs down the far left side of our flowchart, as Alex was saying, there is a clear legal entitlement to a free school lunch. And that's for all children in maintained schools and academies in reception year 1 and year 2, universal infant free school meals. And then on a means tested basis, older children up to 16, year 3 and above up to 16. And as Alex notes, we still need to do the work on the post 16 scheme. So watch this space for those who are concerned about the oldest cohort children. But for those up to 16 in maintained schools and academies, the position is very clear. There is a duty to provide them with a free school lunch. That's not a duty that equates to specific amounts of pounds and pence. So I saw a question flash up about that. It's a duty that means that they should have a lunch. And therefore, of course, it's got to be a lunch that they can actually eat. And we'll come on in a moment to the reasonable adjustments duty and how that bites here. But I keep saying this word duty. What Alex has asked me to deal with is this difference, this critical distinction between a power and a duty, which is pretty geeky, but incredibly important in understanding what we're entitled to. Because the way that our system works, the way our legal system works, is that Parliament imposes a duty or gives a public body a power to do the thing. And the duty is mandatory. If there is a duty to do something, for example, a duty to carry out an assessment, then that public body has no choice. They have to carry out the assessment. If, however, they've got a power to do something, then they may do it, but they also may not. And that choice is given to them by Parliament. And it's not a free choice, because they have to take account of all the relevant factors. They have to ignore irrelevant considerations. For example, what it might mean for their reputation would often be a totally irrelevant consideration. There may be specified things they have to take into account in their decision making. But at the end of the day, if there is a choice as to whether to do something or not, as long as the public body has thought about all the right things, they can choose not to do it. And so that's why it's so important to identify where the duties are. And that's why it's so important that every child who attends maintained school or an academy in the early years is entitled to a free school lunch, because there is a very clear duty on the school, which is delegated to them from the local authority, to provide that lunch. So what about our children that are in exceptional circumstances in various ways? What about children who need a different kind of lunch than their peers? What about children who are on school roll but are actually at home? Well, that's where the reasonable adjustments duty is so important. And that's a duty under the Equality Act, which applies to disabled children of all kinds. And the duty there is on the school, in this context, to make adjustments which are reasonable to the way it carries out its functions, in order to avoid a substantial disadvantage that the child might face. And obviously not getting your free school lunch is a substantial disadvantage. So then we ask, well, what does it mean to do what is reasonable? And the lawyer's answer to that is, well, it depends. You've got to look at all the circumstances. You've got to take into account the cost. You've got to take into account the disruption that the thing might cause, but you've also got to take into account what it means for the child and the family not to get the lunch. And then the school has to do what's reasonable. Things like provide a voucher instead, provide a different kind of food, may well be, often will be, reasonable adjustments that the school can make. And if they can make a reasonable adjustment, then they must make one. And the cost of that adjustment can't be passed on to the family. If it's reasonable to do the thing, then you have to do it free of charge as a body that bears the reasonable adjustment duty. So that's really how it works for the children who are on school roll of a maintained or an academy school of any kind, mainstream or special. They should be getting, from our perspective as lawyers, we look at that cohort and say, well, they should be getting school lunches. It's quite straightforward legally. And it's up to the schools to make that happen, unless it would be unreasonable for them to do it because of the child's particular needs, which I would suggest is going to be only in a very small minority of cases. So then we have the groups where it's not as straightforward. Frankly, we've got these 4 other groups that we've identified where things aren't as clear cut. We've got the children and young people attending independent or non-maintained schools. And of course, the problem for our group is that that may well just be a function of the child's needs, not anything to do with the family wanting, a particularly posh school for the child to attend, because in the mainstream context, independent schools are associated with rich people choosing to educate their children in that way. It doesn't work like that for our families. So there's a problem, I think, with the law there, which is that, as Alex has rightly identified, and as the flowchart shows, no duty. So there isn't anything that says the local authority or the school must provide a free school meal, but the local authority clearly has a power to provide that meal. And it may well be that in a case where the local authority has named an independent school, for example, on section I of a plan, and that's the only school that can meet the child's needs, whether the local authorities agreed that or the tribunals ordered it, and the family are really struggling, as many will be, there's a very strong emphasis on the local authority exercising that power. And it may be ultimately irrational for the local authority not to exercise that power, or unreasonable outside the range of reasonable decisions the local authority could take. And that's what template letter A goes towards, is trying to explain to the local authority that they can provide meals to this group of children, and stressing to them that we say they should. But of course, it would be better if the law was changed to mean that there was a duty in relation to this cohort as well when they are placed under an EHC plan. The next group along, in terms of the homeschool children, they're not eligible for free school meals, and we don't see an obvious way that we can require anyone to exercise a power to provide them with free school meals. And the distinction here between homeschooling, elective home education, as it's sometimes called, and EOTAS, is that this is the group where it will be said that the family have chosen to homeschool. So education otherwise than at school is where the local authority accepts, or the tribunal orders, that the child, it's inappropriate in the language of the legislation for the child to attend a school. Every parent has a right to home educate their child, or to send them to private school if they can afford it, do whatever they want, as long as they're providing their child and ensuring their child receives a suitable education. But if you've chosen, in quotes, to do that, then it's difficult to see why the state should provide your child with a free school meal or an equivalent, where they could, it's said, go to school instead and get that benefit. That's the real difficulty with that group. So this is the group that it will be said have elected, chosen to come outside of the statutory system, and therefore it's up to you, family, you sort it out. Now, if you don't accept that you've chosen, you actually say, no, we're not choosing, then you're actually in the EOTAS group. And what you've really got to do is have an argument with the local authority about whether this is elective home education or EOTAS. So for our purposes, we're assuming the group in the middle is a genuine choice, and therefore you're not going to get a meal. Post 16, as we say, hold that thought, we're coming. The group that Alex then also wanted me to deal with was right on the far side of the flowchart, the EOTAS group. And this is the bit that we're really focusing on in terms of trying to change the law, as Alex was rightly saying, because there is a very clear gap, what lawyers would call a lacuna in the legislation, because this is a group where the state has accepted that the child can't reasonably be expected to go to school. It would be inappropriate for the child to go to school. That's section 61 of the Children and Families Act. And yet they don't get their entitlement to a free school meal. How is that fair? Well, we say it's not. And we say that actually, put into legal terms, it's discriminatory and results in a breach of the Human Rights Act, and results in unlawful discrimination contrary to Article 14 of the European Convention on Human Rights in relation to this group. And that's what we're waiting for the government to respond on. So what we're actually looking at here, and this is the second theme Alex asked me to talk about, is the sticking plaster, really. While we're waiting, we hope for the law to change, whether by agreement or because the court says this is unlawful. The sticking plaster remedy might be that the local authority exercises its duty under Section 2 of the Chronically Sick and Disabled Persons Act to provide free school meals equivalent at home. Now, this is an interesting one because this is still a duty. Section 2 of the Chronically Sick and Disabled Persons Act imposes a duty on local authorities to do various things, but it's a duty that only arises if the local authority accepts that it's necessary for them to do so in order to meet the child's needs. And some of the questions that have already been coming in identify some of the reasons why it might be said by the local authority that it's not necessary, as opposed to simply desirable for them to do so. However, we are aware of cases where the local authority has agreed that it is necessary for them to do so, has provided free school meals in accordance with the Section 2 duty. So it's really important we don't suggest this as a power. It's definitely a duty, but it's what we would describe as a conditional duty. It's conditional on the local authority accepting, following an assessment under the Children Act, that it's necessary to meet the child's needs by providing a free school meal, a voucher, whatever it might be. And that's really going to be a very individualized decision. It's going to be very case by case. So we know they'll have to assess. There's a mandatory duty to assess. And that's what template letter B will say. Go and make sure you do your assessment. If they then say no, having done the assessment, that's where it gets much more difficult and you're going to be needing to get specialist advice. So that's where the social care element of this comes in. I think many local authorities might be surprised to discover they've got a social care duty in this area, but they clearly do. But it's a duty that's only triggered if it's necessary in that individual child's case to provide it. And of course, for the vast majority of children who maintain schools or academies, it will never be necessary because the school's got to do it. So we start with the school. And it's this group here. If Imogen, you could go back up to my top line, please, just so everyone can see the top line. The OTAS group, so this is children who are not on any school roll, and where the state has agreed, either the local authority or the tribunal, that it's inappropriate for them to go to school for whatever reason. That's the group where we think there's a big gap in the law, and there's a sticking plaster in the social care duties, which it's worth trying, but may not be good enough in the short term while we continue to fight to get the law changed. So I think that's me covered the two big themes that Alex asked me to develop. And perhaps, Alex, it might also be helpful if we say at this point a little bit about how people get advice and support, because I see tons of questions coming in where I'm going to want to say, that's too specific, I'm afraid we can't deal with that on a webinar now.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to say, Steve, was I wondered if Imogen wanted to show the snazzy kind of the other bit you have about the flow chart, Imogen, where you just like put in your details, because I think a lot of people are still a bit confused where they sit.
Yeah, that's a great idea. So
Okay.
I'll go on mute and let Imogen come back in for now.
I don't know if you want to talk through that, Imogen, or
Yeah, I can talk through this. So this is on the contact website. There will be all of the guide and the flowchart and the letters. If you're on this webinar, will be emailed directly to you, but they'll also be on the website, so you can access them really easily. We've developed this kind of questionnaire kind of flowchart thing. So all you do is you answer kind of what's appropriate to you. So can your child access their free school meals? No. And then it will drop down, and then it will say, get you to ask kind of, where is your child at school or getting their education from. So if you go on roll, and then is your child in year 1? If I say is the template letter, as Alex was alluding to, you just amend everything in bold so you make it applicable to you, and that's kind of it. So hopefully that will answer a lot of the questions of kind of which one is appropriate to you. We've made it super easy so that hopefully you can find it, and if not, just email me and I can show you where to go.
That's brilliant, thanks. Needless to say that us as lawyers had absolutely nothing to do with the snazzy way the contact have done that, which is why it works so well. Steve, sorry, you were gonna make another point.
Thanks, Alex. Second what Alex says about the nifty technology. It was very, very whizzy, and I checked it out, and it seems to work when you put the various answers in. So well done, team. There's a massive chasm between the law and reality for families with disabled children. Any lawyer who spends more than 10 minutes working in this area will know that. So everything that Alex and I have said today, and all the work we do, is about trying to bridge that gap. And that's why I'm really excited about this work, and the fact we're doing this webinar, and the fact that Natalie's managed to create this incredible momentum about an area of really obvious, social injustice that our families have been experiencing for a very long time. What do you do when they say no? Because there comes a point where the answer that's given is too detailed and too focused on the individual case for a session like this to be helpful, or a general talk to be helpful. You're going to need to talk to someone who can give you advice about your case and tell you how to answer, how to deal with the no in your case. And the reality is that needs to be someone with a good understanding of the law and the kind of competence and insurance to deal with what happens if you give the wrong advice. because competent lawyers don't just start answering specific questions, on the hoof in sessions like this. It would actually be, if Alex or I were to do that, it would actually be professional misconduct, because you have to be able to take proper instructions from our clients before we can give advice, because our advice is something that they're then entitled to rely on. So on my blog, and it's Rights and Reality, I can put the thread in the link in the chat. There is a list of solicitors' firms, which of course includes Alex's firm, which I've worked with, where people can seek advice. Now, it's not very clearly a recommendation. It's a series of suggestions of people who hold themselves out as being experts or having expertise in this area, and also firms that I've worked with, and I can say, yeah, I can see that there's some expertise there. Capacity is a massive issue for solicitors. Now, first of all, of course, can you pay for a solicitor? Well, legal aid is available in these areas, including, I should stress, if you have a school that's saying no, you can bring a claim of disability discrimination against the school in the tribunal, the same tribunal that deals with EHC appeals. And legal aid is available for those appeals, but you need to find a solicitor that's got the discrimination contract, and I think there are about 3 in the country. So it's going to be hard to find a solicitor that can help you with that. And also you have as a parent to be financially eligible as well. It's the form of legal aid with legal help, where the means of the parents are taken into account. So if you can't get legal aid, then the question is, can you pay for it? Some people will be able to, many people won't. Firms are aware of that, and I know will try and offer deals, fixed fees, those kinds of things where they can. But lawyers are not cheap. We know that. What I would say, and I think I can say this as a barrister perhaps even more freely than solicitors can, neither are non-qualified lawyers who offer advice and support in this area. Be careful with people who hold themselves out as advocates or advisors who aren't qualified lawyers. Some are really good, some aren't. But the point is, it's the Wild West. There's no quality control. There's no requirement to be registered with anyone. So if you are going to pay for advice and you're not paying a qualified lawyer, make sure you think about that, and that you know why you're doing that, and don't assume that they're going to be cheaper than a solicitor or a barrister, because that may well not be the case. So, long answer to a difficult question, and I would very interested to see Natalie's got a hand up. I'm very interested to hear what Natalie's got to say about this in a minute. But the short point is, there will come a point in your discussions, should we say, with the school and or the local authority, where the answer just becomes something that has to be challenged on your individual case. And at that point, you are going to need specialist advice. There's a point at which template letters are no longer good enough. Natalie, what do you think about all of that?
Oh, well, I just kind of wanted to ask you, Steve, because whether what you think about going to tribunals. As someone myself who's represented myself 3 times now at tribunals and been successful each time, not being able to afford legal representation, I also didn't want to use unregulated advocates because they're not regulated. And am I right in thinking that if you did a disability discrimination claim to the tribunals, based on the law, if your child is enrolled at the school, it's most likely that you would succeed because there's a strong enough law in place, and that even if it was settled a paper hearing, so you didn't even have to actually attend and go through the stress of attending, that it's quite likely that you would win that case, do you think, in your professional opinion? Because obviously it is completely free to lodge a disability discrimination claim. And equally, I think this is right, that if you have IOTUS and you did the same thing, you would lose, because there is no law in place currently for IOTUS. And the only way that you can get help at the moment for IOTUS is through the social care funding, directly through social care and applying to social care and going through the whole financial assessment with them, unless the law gets changed or the Secretary of State decides to put in some kind of legalisation, new legislation. Would you say that was correct? And what do you think about that?
Just asked me a brilliantly leading set of questions there, Natalie. Well done. I'm going to resist the temptation to be led into just saying the word yes, but you are broadly right, I think. Let me just break that down a little bit. So, yes, for the children in school or the children who are on school roll, you absolutely have a right to go to the tribunal. And as Natalie rightly says, there's no cost associated with that. There's no issue fee. The tribunal is not entirely cost-free as a jurisdiction. The tribunal has a power to award costs either for or against a family if they've behaved unreasonably, or if the local authority or the school in this case have behaved unreasonably in the way they've run the claim or the appeal. But that's a very, very high bar. And in practice, it's incredibly rare that costs even come up, never mind that the tribunal awards them. But just keep that in mind, because people say, oh, there's no cost in the tribunal. Technically there are. It's not a completely free ride. Can you win a tribunal claim for disability discrimination against a school for not providing a free school meal without lawyers? Yes, definitely. What you would need to show is that the school has failed to make reasonable adjustments. And the problem with the Equality Act is it is quite technical. Now, if you're able to look up sections 20 and 21 of the Equality Act yourself, read my book, read other resources, and explain to the tribunal why the schools failed to make reasonable adjustments, absolutely, give it a go if you think that you've got a good case, because the tribunal will help. The tribunal will, in the registration order, explain what they've understood the issues to be and try and fit it within the scope of the Equality Act. But at the same time, there's only so far the tribunal can go. And there are very technical elements to all of the Equality Act grounds. And if you don't have advice, there is a risk that you're going to miss a point that you need to bring in order to win the claim. It's quite different, I think, to the SEN appeals when you're dealing with the section B and F of an EHC plan, for example, because that really is just, well, I say it's not so much about the law, often it can be, but primarily it's about the evidence. You know, what does the child need? What provision is required? And that's something parents, you know, may be able to do realistically on their own. But this is a different kind of thing. If you're claiming that the school's acted unlawfully, then it's more of like a kind of civil claim in the county court, where you're making an allegation and they're defending it. It does feel quite different in the tribunal when you're dealing with an Equality Act.
Sorry to interrupt you, Steve, but obviously if you have a lawyer doing this for you, but if you're on free school meals, you can't afford a lawyer, and legal aid takes ages, and then it's just, and imagine if there's 2,000 people in the group, imagine 2,000 people applying for lawyers and all asking for your services. It's not sustainable. And the whole campaign is, it needs to be more automatic. And I just think if a few people, there are some people in the group who are waiting for their tribunal that's coming up in October, November. And the other question I had was about the power and the duty. So there are people in the group who are looking at the laws themselves, and there will be neurodiverse parents with neurodiverse children who are very good at looking at laws and find that more easier than actually communicating with the schools. But equally, they might get very overwhelmed and not have the the background to understand it. I find it hard. I don't have a legal background. And basically, can you just explain the difference between duty to and the power to and the power of, duty of, and so people kind of be more aware about the strength of the law, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Okay. Before I do that, Natalie, I will do that, but let me also just deal with the last part of your previous question, which was about the OTAS group. There's no point bringing a tribunal claim for disability discrimination unless a child is on a school roll, because the tribunal only has jurisdiction to deal with claims against schools. If you want to try and argue the local authority have breached the Equality Act, you can do that in the county court, but be very careful, because the county court comes with costs both ways. So you would never want to issue a county court claim, I would suggest, without legal advice, or else you're at serious risk of being ordered to pay the other side's costs. So just wanted to flag that point. So yes, the tribunal is there to be used, and I would encourage parents to use it with appropriate advice where you can get it. And there are advocates and others, of course, that may help. And I know Contact provided advice through the helpline. Organisations like IPSI, SOS, SEN. So everyone's overstretched, but there are resources out there. But only do that if you've got a child who's on a school roll. Your point about housing duties. So this is where the words in broad terms mean what they say. So if you are reading a piece of legislation and it says the local authority must or the local authority shall do something, that's a duty, because the language that's used is mandatory. Must or shall is a requirement. The key word that triggers a power to do something is may. So if you see in legislation that someone may do something, that's a power, because it implies they may not do it. It implies a choice. Now, the reason I say the words broadly mean what they mean is there are different kinds of duties as well. There are duties that are specific and owed to individual children, like the duty to provide a free school meal. But there are also duties that are general and owed to groups of children. For example, the duty to have services for children in need under the Children Act. That's a general duty to have services, not a duty to provide a service to a specific child. So that's why I hope in Disabled Children, a Legal Handbook, we've usefully gone through that explanation in chapter 2. And then in each of the chapters, we explain whether something is a power, a specific duty, a general duty, whatever it is. So you definitely do need to read the law with some support. But one thing I can say clearly is may is a power. If you see the word may, that is not a duty. It's a power to do something which implies a choice. And Alex would like to come back in now, so I will hand back to Alex.
Thanks, Steve. I just wanted to make a simple point that I hope people have picked up, but I just don't want anyone to be intimidated by this latter end of the conversation. All of this doesn't come in, or doesn't need to come in, until you've sent the template letter. You've got to reply to the template letter that you're not happy with. To Natalie's absolutely valid point, 2,000 people, lawyers aren't available, etc. That's kind of the reason why the hope in the first instance is that we can write these template letters so you can all go away, make the argument in the most forceful way that you can by using the law that we've set out and the difference in power and the duty. It's all set out in those letters. So hopefully a large percentage of you who feel like you should be getting free school meals but are not, on behalf of your family member, will be able to just send the template letter and that should resolve the issue. Steve absolutely rightly flags the very real problem, what happens if you don't. I just wanted to make sure everyone understood that only arises once you've sent the template letter and are still not happy.
That's really helpful, Alex. And I should probably, it's quite astonishing I've got this far into the webinar and I'm conscious of time without saying the words judicial review, because that's normally one of the sort of first things that I would be saying in a talk like this. The point at which you reach the end game of the discussions, i.e. template letter sent, response, no, you don't see any way through. If you can't bring a tribunal claim, so if you're in the EOTAS group and it was a refusal to provide under Section 2 of the Chronically Sick and Disabled Persons Act, the legal remedy would be judicial review, which is an intimidating process, we can say, because it's in the High Court and it's very technical, but legal aid is more widely available for judicial review than in the tribunal. Not suggesting for a moment it's easy, but it is there. And it's a process that's needs to be entirely run by lawyers. Do not issue a judicial review claim on your own. That would be an extraordinarily bad idea, in my view. Make sure you get a specialist lawyer to help you, and then they will do all the work for you, of course. Happy days. So don't forget that there is a way out through judicial review.
That's great. We have 2 questions. First one from Liz has got her hand up.
Hello, yes, thank you very much. I just wanted to clarify for children of compulsory school age who are on roll at, let's say, a maintained or academy school, but are unable to attend due to illness, permanent exclusion or otherwise, who then, where the duty upon the local authority is engaged to provide alternative education under Section 19 of the Education Act. So we've got a local authority duty to provide that group of children with education, but they are still on roll at a school. They're not getting EOTAS in its truest form. Because they are on roll at a school, would there then be a duty upon the school to provide that alternative free school meal in the form of a voucher? I just wanted to clarify for that particular group of children.
Yeah, potentially yes, Liz, because the language, sorry guys, it's about to get very technical, the language of Section 512 of the Education Act talks about there being a duty to make this provision where a child is receiving education either on the school premises or at any other place where education is being provided. So my reading of the legislation is that it doesn't matter where the child is actually being educated. What matters is whether they're on the school roll or not. And so that's why we've distinguished between the cohort who are on roll and the cohort who are formally EOTAS, otherwise, i.e. they're not on roll and are being educated permanently, or it may not be entirely permanently, but let's assume for present purposes it is, otherwise than at school.
That's perfect. Thank you very much.
Jane, and then I think we might be running out of time, but there's 2 more questions after that.
I just want to endorse some of the things that Steve said, because he brought up a very difficult point for us. We started as a campaign site. We are not an advocacy site. we only have a paragraph of all of these complex situations that people are describing. And I think that Alex has found out that it was a rabbit hole that, you know, just expanded exponentially with all the different types of claims that are being made. And so there is a limit to what we can advocate, respond and run template letters. And sometimes you do come to the end of that road. And I like to think that essentially we stay a campaign site, but you know, there is this advocacy element that comes in. So I'm going to step down now and let the other questions come up.
Yeah. Owen? Or Mitchell Morgan? Michelle Morgan?
Hi, it's Michelle, yes.
Sorry.
So I do apologise. I unfortunately couldn't get on the webinar for the first 45 minutes, but I'll try to just keep it brief. So my 3 disabled children, we'll just stick to 2 of them, but the 3 of them stayed off for 2 years due to shielding letters in the pandemic. They then went back for a year in comprehensive school. Both my twin sons are 25 hours each for physical needs, statemented to have support whilst they're in school. Due to various reasons, such as bullying and health and things, they haven't attended school since December. But the school have contacted me. They marked as unauthorised absences and asked me to sign. They need a new statement. They needed a statement review. I don't know now whether to sign that form now or whether to just deregister them from the school. Because the next step they told me is prosecution.
Sorry to interrupt. Michelle, sorry to interrupt. We can't deal with individual cases. In this
I
session.
do apologise. We're in Wales as well. Yeah.
Yes, well, that's really helpful, Michelle, because I did want to flag something that perhaps we could have said earlier, which is that the law is different, of course, across the 4 UK nations, including increasingly between England and Wales. Wales, of course, has a lot of autonomy now in areas in relation to welfare provision. So I think that's a really helpful point that you've allowed us to emphasise, that not only do you need to get individual advice about the facts of your case, make sure you're getting advice from someone who knows about the law in your jurisdiction, because I wouldn't begin to tell people what the entitlements are in Scotland, for example. But what I can say, of course, is the Equality Act is UK-wide legislation. Brackets, it works slightly differently in different jurisdictions, but it is UK-wide. So you can rely on the principles that we've spoken about today. But if you're outside England, it's really important that you ensure that anyone who's talking to you understands that.
Yeah.
And perhaps the first thing to say will be your location, because the law is very, very different across the 4 nations.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask, because we are in Wales, I heard, you know, in the last 10 minutes you were speaking about certain procedures. So in Wales, where would be, from
Very
your
similar
point of view,
in
my
Wales,
first point of contact to now to look for advice? Is there a solicitor or?
Yes, there's a tribunal system in Wales, and judicial review operates in the same way in England and Wales. So
Thank you very much.
we can, Alex and I actually do Welsh cases, have done Welsh cases, Alex, haven't we? So Wales is within,
do you want another
Wales
one?
is within our wheelhouse. Yes, indeed.
We're quite unique, I promise.
I have put Alex's web profile in one of the boxes, by the way.
Excellent.
People would like to find him.
Thank you.
Time. I don't know about you all, but I know I have another meeting, so I'm already late for.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's probably all we have time for. We'll try and get all the questions downloaded from Contact, but and get back to as many people as we can do. But thank you everyone for joining us. Yeah, it's been really informative and really appreciate it, and excited to launch all these new fantastic resources.
Thanks to you, Imogen, and thanks to everyone involved. It's a pleasure to work on with you all. I'm glad to get blown away in a storm.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.